What's going on, you guys? It is your boy, the American F1 fan, Eric Ringle here, and it is the F1nal Lap Podcast. It is a new podcast that I'm going to be putting out not only on YouTube, but on all podcasting platforms, talking about anything and everything that has to do with F1 in the news. And we have just finished the Singapore Grand Prix this morning, and it was a very interesting race. I must admit that I think it was one of those races that we were kind of looking forward to all season long. We had, the mix of wet and dry conditions, and, who was going to, be the first one to make the move to slick tires. And it was a race of attrition too, I think, really, in the grand scheme of things. It was one of those races that, if you survived, you almost were in the points just by surviving. And I think, going back, I think there were some mistakes that were kind of made by the stewards. So let's go back to the beginning of the race. Beginning of the Singapore Grand Prix was delayed about an hour because of heavy rain. And this is where my first complaint comes in, because I get where, Formula One is all about safety and, wanting to make sure that, we keep the driver safe and, and we don't put them in a situation where, a horrible, tragedy could potentially happen. But, then why do we have the basically the full wet tires that Formula One has? Because, and Anthony Davidson, I think, brought it up, pretty well on the podcast, on the broadcast, and he said, those tires can disperse over 60 gallons of water, a second, and that number may be off. I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but why were we not getting started 30 minutes sooner? Like, I get the safety portion of it, but I truly believe that we should have been at least racing 30 minutes in, instead of basically waiting for the rain to stop. And yes, we got running on intermediate tires, but I think in the grand scheme of things, when we look at it, we look forward to wet racing, and let's race in the rain. Come on, if we're just not going to race in the rain anymore, then I think we just need to do away with the wet tires altogether and just wait till the track dries out, NASCAR does at most of their tracks, or IndyCar used to do in the past. And I feel like it's one of those that we need to let these guys go and race. And in Formula One, we call it, us as fans, and, all the F1 pundits want to say that, this is the pinnacle of motor racing. And, a lot of other, racing leagues have now started to race in the rain a lot more because of Formula One and the fact that they do race in the rain. And, the fact that we waited literally until it was almost bone dry on certain parts of the track was it was kind of disappointing. But it's whatever. I get the safety portion of it, but I really feel like the wet tires have become completely useless at this point. So going to the start of the race, Charles Leclerc starting on pole position, Sergio Perez in second place, Lewis Hamilton in third. And I gotta say, Sergio got an amazing start here, was able to pass Charles Leclerc right on the start, and was able to get into the lead. And Sergio Perez, I think this was by far one of his most dominant, best drives he's ever had in Formula One. And it's not saying that he hasn't had some really good drives in the past, but I think this was one of those ones that, it kind of stamps the, Sergio Perez is a good race driver. And, there's some in Formula One that, want to kind of still, crap on, Sergio Perez at times. But, I mean, today was a prime example, I think, of what Sergio Perez can do when he's given the right equipment. And, moving from Racing Point to Red Bull, big, huge step up, had a decent first season. But now he's getting some wins under his belt in 2022. And, it's really starting to show that, Sergio Perez is an amazing F1 driver and, has deserved everything he has gotten up to this point. But, we have to lament again on another Charles Leclerc just choke job here. I mean, you go out in qualifying, you qualify on pole position. This is exactly what you needed, especially with Max Verstappen qualifying in 8th. Like, this is what you needed. And you bottle it on the start. Like, it's amazing to me. I hope that Charles Leclerc is not turning into this, choke job. But, he's not really proving anybody incorrect when you would call him a choke artist. I mean, basically losing first position, and literally he almost lost, second position to Carlos at the very beginning. Like, now granted, Carlos, he would have passed Carlos back because Carlos just didn't have any speed today. But, to see Charles Leclerc just not being able to do what, supposedly Ferrari brought him in to do, which was he was this young, showing so much talent, but right now he's not showing that talent, and I think it's really hurting Ferrari, and I think it's hurting his legacy too, because he's one of those guys that you expected to win a championship fairly soon, and he's not doing it, and it's really getting disheartening, I think, a little bit at Ferrari that, Charles Leclerc keeps getting put in, he puts himself in these positions to, win races, and he finds a way to choke it away. So now moving on later into the race, we're still under the intermediate tires. We had, on the very first lap, we had Verstappen and Kevin Magnussen come together. Verstappen caused a little bit of damage to Kevin Magnussen's car, broke off the end plate. It's now hanging there. And again, we get the, Verstappen radio call. Oh, well, his end plate's hanging off. You guys gotta make him pit. Like, I'm sure that the FIA was gonna make him pit anyways, but like, it's one of those that, like, let the FIA steward the race. I don't need all these drivers coming over the radio, oh, he pushed me off the racetrack, or, oh, he pushed me wide, or, oh, did you see that, or, like, I'm really starting to think that the FIA and Formula One need to clamp down on the radio communications in Formula One, because it's literally, I have never heard as much complaining over the radio as we've heard over the last, 4 or 5 seasons of Formula One, where it's just complaint after complaint after complaint. Like, all right already, we get it. Like, something happened. Let the stewards steward the race. We got rid of Michael Massey for a reason. We put, new guys in place. So let them do their job instead of trying to do their job for them. And I mean, that even goes for Ferrari at the end of the race, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But, let's let the stewards steward the race a little bit when it comes to, incidents on track. And in that same regards, I think that the stewards need to, I think evenly use the rules the way that, they're written out there. I mean, Kevin Magnussen has damage to his car because of Max Verstappen. Like, I mean, yes, it's a racing incident, but like in the same instance, now Max Verstappen, who's damaged Kevin's end plate, is now going, oh, well, he needs to pit. Well, that's because of you, dingbat. Like, I think that it's one of those let them race. I think we see it a lot in IndyCar, and that's kind of the thing I like about IndyCar a little bit, is you don't see that much in the way of, drivers saying, oh, well, this is wrong with this car, you need to make him pit, or at least I haven't seen it as much, and maybe you guys at home that are listening or watching this have seen it a little bit more than I have, but I think in the grand scheme of things, I think we just let them race. I know again, it's a safety aspect, but I think in the grand scheme of things, I think let them race. If anything, Kevin's already getting punished at the fact that now his car is not going to perform at optimum levels, being with a damaged, end plate. It's going to create issues with his downforce, and it's not going to allow the car to race quite as well. So, I think you let him race there, and, eventually he would have either pit on his own because, he just needed to pit. He was losing time, and that probably, I think that goes a lot better than, drivers and stewards telling him to pit. But, we had a couple other, entanglements on the first couple laps. But I think all in all, everybody raced really well in the wet. And this is, again, why I feel like maybe we should have started the race on, the full wet tires, because I think for the most part, everyone really behaved themselves when it came to, not pulling anything stupid. We didn't see anything stupid until we got to the slick tire period. And, that's more like people just trying too hard more than just being stupid. But, seeing, how well behaved for the most part we raced under the wet, I think we should have started that race a little bit sooner. And, we had attrition in this race. Nicholas Latifi once again puts himself in the middle of a conversation. He wrecks out Guan Yu Zhou, wrecks himself out of the race. He now has a 5-place grid penalty. He can't start any lower than 20th, where he typically starts. I've got to wonder how much more Williams is going to put up with Latifi, especially knowing that he's not going to be with the team next season. So it's really interesting to see, going into Japan next week, what's going to be done. But, like I said, Nicholas Latifi, Guan Yu Zhou, first ones to drop out of the race. This was a race of attrition as well, because then you had issues, engines just blowing up left and right. Alpine had a really horrible race. Fernando Alonso's engine blows up about midway, about third or quarter of the way through the race. Alexander Albon runs straight into the wall. It was in turn 6, if I remember correctly. Turn 6 or turn 7 is where he ran into the wall, basically just ruined the car at that point. Got it back to the pits, but they weren't able to make repairs. Esteban Ocon's engine let go. Alpine, like I said, had a horrible weekend. Yuki Tsunoda, once we got to the dry period, probably got a little bit too cocky and went into where the old Singapore Sling used to be, or right before the Singapore Sling. Or no, it was right at the Singapore Sling, excuse me. And he runs that into the wall, ending his race. You had some decent fights, I think, in the midfield all throughout this race. I do have to say that George Russell, this was not my favorite race of his, and I truly think he got away a little bit with some of his driving style in this race, especially trying to pass Mick Schumacher. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a Haas Formula One fan first and foremost, but to see the move he pulled going into turn 1 and basically moved over on Mick Schumacher while they were still almost side by side. Like, I don't know how you call that a race incident. Like, the stewards said that there was no investigation needed on that incident. And I looked at myself and I guess I didn't want to penalize him because, he already had the punctured tire, but like, that doesn't matter. Like, you can't move in the braking zone like that, and that's exactly what he did to Mick Schumacher, and that ruined Mick's race. Mick was running midfield all race long. He was running on that borderline for points. And I get it. We got to the dry period and the Haas really kind of dropped off, and we'd seen that all throughout the weekend, that Haas really wasn't that great in the dry. But give him a shot. I mean, with the way the race was going, attrition was, I mean, at the point that this happened, we had 8 drivers, or I think it was 6 or 7 drivers out of the race at this point. And who knows? We could have a tussle in the top 10 that, takes out a couple drivers, and all of a sudden Mick's in the points. And it's not very fair that if Russell were to, get ahead of him and get into the points, I don't think that would have necessarily been fair, but, so be it. George finished last of the, the runners that were still in the race, so, I get it, but I think he still deserved a penalty there once we got to the dry period. We saw once we got to the slick period, when they got to the slick tires, I think that everybody was expecting there to be a little bit more grip, and I think we saw it. Max Verstappen made several mistakes, locking up his tires and going into that third sector. We saw it with Lewis Hamilton trying to make the pass on Sebastian Vettel that, sent him straight on at turn 6. That basically gave a free position to Verstappen. It's one of those, I think, I get that you're trying to make up positions because of how your race has gone. But I think in the grand scheme of things, a lot of people needed to be more of, damage limitation. Let's limit the damage that has happened in this race, and let's limit this to as much as we can. And I didn't see it. And, Lewis Hamilton paid the price. Max Verstappen, I think, paid the price too. He was running near top 5 there for a little bit before he flat spotted the hell out of his tires twice. We almost saw it with Sergio Perez there at times, locking up his tires. Charles Leclerc, just right on his back, but could not do enough to get past Sergio Perez. But we get to the safety car, the very last safety car of the race. And this is where I think there's going to be a lot of contention from Formula One fans. And, there's going to be your Red Bull fans that are going to say, oh, this is no big deal. Like, I don't understand why he was penalized 5 seconds. And then there's going to be a lot of fans out there that are going, he had 2 incidents, by the FIA standards. It's... I don't know I don't know what the right answer here is. I think the right answer was the 5 seconds. But I can see Ferrari's point of view, but I can also see Red Bull's point of view with how Sergio, discussed it, with the stewards. It was one of those that, the first incident, excuse me, he dropped back more than 10 car lengths of the safety car, which you're not allowed to do under the safety car period. You have to stay within 10 car lengths. Sergio Perez doesn't do that. And I believe the first incident is where he pulls basically right alongside the safety car, tells him to, get moving faster. And I get that he's trying to, get the safety car to move a little bit quicker, but that's a dangerous move there. I mean, that's extremely dangerous. You hit a wet spot on that track, especially on that front straight. You hit a wet spot there, and you could very easily be into the side of that safety car, and ruin your race. So, I can see, the 5-second penalty there. Then when we get closer to the restart, this is the one that I'm a little bit like, okay, I don't think it was a big deal. The safety car was getting ready to end. Apparently the rule is as long as the safety car lights are still on in the car, you have to stay within that 10 lengths. They were on the Anderson Bridge, or had just crossed the Anderson Bridge and was coming on that last back straightaway. And that's where, you see Sergio Perez start to slow down. The safety car pulled away. This one I don't think was that big of a deal. I think, at a certain point you're trying to take over for the safety car, and I just think maybe Sergio may have misjudged it a little bit, knowing that the safety car period was ending. So I see the 5 second, maybe a 10-second penalty on that very first incident, but not on the second one. The reprimand was fine for me. But that first one, I think, is that little iffy one that you could have given at least a 10-second, but the 5 second I'm okay with. But I know there are going to be fans out there that are going to be like, oh my God, we've got to lose our minds. Like, the FIA is trying to help Red Bull. Like, I don't think that was necessarily the case here. I think to a certain extent, especially after last season, I don't think the new FIA and the new stewards don't want to be a part of the, basically making the decision about, who wins a race. They'd rather leave it up to the racers. So I get why the 5 second penalty occurs after the race. But Sergio Perez still holds on, because after that safety car period, Sergio Perez just masterfully drove against Charles Leclerc. Charles was so close and just didn't want to pull that trigger. And I think that shows signs that Charles Leclerc is a little maybe trigger shy in a sense. And didn't want to necessarily go for the move. But I get, too, that you don't want to take yourself out and score no points whatsoever. So I get why Charles Leclerc goes that way. But, after a while, he was in the DRS, within DRS range of Sergio Perez, and then makes a couple mistakes down the stretch that, really just, I think, either killed his tires or just, it took him out of DRS range 1, and Sergio Perez was able to just pull out enough of a gap that I think, had even Charles had, still life in those tires, Sergio Perez does such a good job of, taking care of his tires. I think once Sergio, was able to pull out, just past a second, I think it was his race to win. And it was. Sergio Perez won the Singapore Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc finishing second. Carlos Sainz finishing third. That was a great result for Ferrari. I think it was much needed. It was one of those that I think in the grand scheme of things will help Ferrari, a little bit, in the Constructors' Championship. If you're still, fighting for it, you get 33 points out of that race, whereas, Red Bull only they get 31, so you gain 2 points. It needs to be much more than that, though, to be able to make up that kind of a gap. You have Lando Norris finishing fourth. Great race by McLaren, who needed this race to, kind of make up some room on Alpine, with Alpine, both cars finishing outside of the points. Daniel Ricciardo with his best race of the season finishing fifth. You had Lance Stroll finishing sixth. Max Verstappen finishing seventh. A great, recovery drive. Hit the anti-stall button on the beginning of the race. Hit the anti-stall at the beginning of the race. Really bogged down. Had some issues there at the middle part of the race. Went straight on a couple times. Flat spotted his tires. Great recovery drive for Max. He had Sebastian Vettel finishing eighth. Lewis Hamilton in ninth. What could have been for Lewis Hamilton? Got stuck behind Carlos Sainz through the middle part of that race. Carlos, I think, did a good job of just being able to hold off Lewis Hamilton, and being able to make sure that that he just wasn't able to get past and try to get, closer to Charles. So great job from Carlos to block him off. Unfortunately, Lewis makes his own mistakes there and, went straight on trying to get past Sebastian, and that gifted positions to Max Verstappen. You had Pierre Gasly finishing 10th, last points paying position. Valtteri finishes 11th. Kevin Magnussen finishing 12th. 13th, Mick Schumacher. And 14th is George Russell. The non-finishers of this race were Yuki Tsunoda, Esteban Ocon, Alexander Albon, Fernando Alonso, Nicholas Latifi, and Guan Yu Zhou. So, like I said, Singapore Grand Prix, I think, gave us the race we had been kind of expecting when we were, thinking that when we saw the potential for rain, come up in the forecast. I think this was one of those, it was an attrition type race, but it was one of those if you could keep the mistakes to a minimum, you were going to do well in this race. So now moving on, next week, it is the Japanese Grand Prix. We are moving to Japan next week. Again, this is another one of those races where, we didn't have, the last 2 seasons because of COVID, obviously. We didn't have those races in Japan, so we're finally returning back to Japan. This is one of those I'm not going to be exactly thrilled about, as the race time here in the United States is going to be midnight on Sunday. So that's going to be a late one for me. But like I said, we're going to Japan, which I'm excited for. This is one of those tracks that is, I've said in prior videos, we talk about like the historic tracks and, wanting to kind of keep them on the calendar. And I think that Japan is one of those ones that absolutely has to stay on the calendar. I think it produces such great racing in the grand scheme of Formula One that, it was just much needed that we return back there. So it's a 53-lap race over a 5.807 kilometer Suzuka circuit. Race is going to take place on October 9th. No sprint qualifying this round, so we're going to get 3 practice sessions and then qualifying on Saturday. I think maybe the sprint race would have been really good for Japan. I think it's one of those ones that, is one of those sleeper that could really produce some good sprint action. But we're not going to get it. So 53-lap race. The lap record is held by Lewis Hamilton, who set this time in 2019, which coincidentally enough is the last time we raced in Suzuka. Haven't seen a whole lot of what the weather is planning on doing yet. Obviously, we're a week out. Weather reports are, kind of wishy-washy a week out. We'll probably see a little bit more when it comes to what the weather may do, once we get a little bit closer to the weekend. I think this is one of those tracks. This is a very high-speed track. Yes, you have your low-speed corners, but this is one of those ones that I think could really suit a team that has really worked on their downforce packages. An Aston Martin, a Haas, teams like those that really, put a lot of work this year into their downforce package. I think this is a racetrack that could really help those guys out. And Haas really needs it here. And we'll talk about points here at the very end. But I think, this is one of those that it's just, I'm excited for. It's a long time coming. I missed it out the last 2 seasons, but to finally be back in Suzuka, absolutely looking forward to it. And again, we've got a chance that Max Verstappen can win the championship. It's basically going to be the whole way out of the season unless Charles Leclerc can pull off some kind of miracle and, Red Bull, happens to have, the worst reliability of all time. But, we'll have to wait and see. I don't see it happening anytime soon. Red Bull just has seemed to have solved the reliability issues that we saw at the beginning of the season, and we just haven't seen that blip on the radar. And maybe it comes towards the end of the season. Maybe this is where we finally see those blips start to hit the radar, and Red Bull runs into this this buzzsaw of reliability issues, and all of a sudden Charles Leclerc is back in this championship, or Carlos Sainz. I mean, that's not going to happen. But I'm just saying that a lot of things could happen with the potential if the reliability issues finally start hitting Red Bull now. But so gonna end the podcast there. Very first episode, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about the podcast. I'm gonna look forward to doing more episodes. We're gonna do race. This is how we're gonna do our race recaps and race previews a little bit. Race previews are gonna kind of go away on the YouTube channel. We're gonna try to stick to more like reaction videos, opinionated videos. When a certain situation comes up. We're going to try to do more opinionated videos there. So we're going to take the race recaps and race previews. We're going to bring it to the podcast platform. You guys can listen to us on Anchor.fm. It's going to be called the F1nal Lap Podcast. So guys, go and search. Excuse me, I've been coughing like hell. My voice is gone. But go look on Anchor.fm. Just search F1nal Lap Podcast. Also, you'll be able to find it on YouTube. We're going to be posting it on YouTube as well as you're going to be able to see the video from it. But guys, let me know in the comment section down below what questions you have, what comments, what concerns. And if you guys leave me enough comments in the comment section down below, I'll do a special video where I answer your questions for a podcast. So let's do that. Leave your questions and comments in the comment section down below, and we will do a special podcast where I just answer those questions and comments. But guys, also, if you're watching this on YouTube, slap a like on this video for more daily and weekly Formula One content. Also, on my YouTube channel, subscribe if you guys are new for more daily and weekly Formula One content. Also, on all your favorite podcasting platforms, make sure you follow us to get updates on when new episodes are posted all the time. But guys, thank you so much for listening or watching on YouTube. It means the world to me. But guys, for the American F1 fan, for the F1nal Lap Podcast, I'm Eric Ringel, signing off.